Hello, I'm Alex Gupta with UATV. Today I'm speaking with Mr. Edward Lucas, an author and senior editor at The Economist. Hello, Mr. Lucas. Welcome to UATV.
It's great to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
In 2008, you wrote the book The New Cold War, and I'm sure there were a lot of skeptics in 2008. But do you feel vindicated that in 2017, we are definitely in a new Cold War?
I'm afraid things are much worse than I thought. I was actually writing the book back in 2007, and I was, I think, correct in my analysis of Russia's trajectory towards repression at home and aggression abroad. But I was really focusing on what we call the frontline states, the Baltic states, Ukraine, Georgia. I was very worried there was going to be a war in Georgia. That turned out true. What I didn't realize was how deeply Russia was going to be able to penetrate and subvert the big West European and North American countries. And I think the front line now doesn't really run through eastern Ukraine and the Baltic states. It runs through Paris, Berlin, London, Washington, D.C.
So do you think that certain countries in the East Europe, are lost? Or do you think they have no chance against Russian aggression?
I think things are very difficult the smaller and poorer you are. So it's really very difficult, I think, for Moldova, which doesn't have enough people to support, for example, high quality media or strong civil society. And I think we've really neglected the smaller and poorer countries, particularly. I think big countries like Ukraine have actually shown an amazing ability to fight back, both against the economic legacy of the Yanukovych regime and also in your ongoing military conflict with Russia. So I think that we have lost ground in a lot of countries, but in a way, the most encouraging thing is the countries that I did think were most endangered have, for the most part, done very well and have many lessons to teach the West.
Recently, you've wrote about Trump, and you've talked about how him and Putin seem to form a dangerous alliance. Do you still think that, or have you somewhat changed your mind on the Trump administration?
I think that there's some encouraging signs, and I think General Master, James Mattis, Rex Tillerson, Dan Coates, the head of national intelligence, Mr. Pompeo at the Central Intelligence Agency, these are all serious people who would not be out of place, excuse me, in any other Republican administration. So there is some sign of what one might call adult supervision in the administration. But there are three serious dangers. One is that Mr. Trump's loose talk and loose tweets have devalued the world's most important political currency, which was the words of the president, and America's just not taken quite as seriously. Then there is the danger of a grand bargain, which I don't discount, and that he will get together with Mr. Putin. And although there are things we can certainly talk about, like arms control, which would be great, there's also the danger of a more sweeping deal trading the security of our European allies for some kind of cooperation on terrorism. And then third, and perhaps most dangerous, is a miscalculation, that some sort of crisis happens very quickly and Trump either overreacts, which could be very dangerous and starts a shooting war, or underreacts and says, I'm not going to risk World War III for the sake of a police station in eastern Latvia, or and he misreads the problem, and then suddenly NATO's credibility is just over. We failed to defend one of the frontline states, and we will then be in a post-NATO era, which will be very difficult and dangerous. So I see lots of reasons for concern, but I also see some cautious grounds for optimism.
You wrote about a new Yalta. What did you mean by that? What would be the prospects of that?
I think that the big danger is that the Trump administration sees Vladimir Putin's Russia as a serious ally against terrorism. And I think that's just not the case. I think even at the high point of US-Russian relations, they weren't able to do very much. And I think any cooperation now would be rather illusory. The one thing they are willing to do is to kill civilians in large numbers in places like Syria. And I'm not sure that's the sort of cooperation that we really want. But I think that if the Trump administration believes that that's possible, and they may also want Russian cooperation against China, which I think is also illusory, then they may say, well, what can we give the Russians in return? Or the Russians may say, can you give us something? And that could be a lessening of sanctions, which would be bad. It could be a recognition of the de facto annexation of Crimea, or even the de jure annexation of Crimea. It could be arm twisting Ukraine into accepting a bad deal to end or freeze the conflict in the east. It could also be a ban on or a halt to any further NATO expansion, which would be bad both for Ukraine and Georgia, although you don't have immediate expectations of joining NATO, but also very bad for Sweden and Finland, which have always believed that if they needed to join NATO, they could. And then finally, the danger of pulling troops back, as they would put it, from the front line. So we would take our troops back out again from Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland in return for Russia withdrawing some troops from its western military district. And I think that would be a devastating blow to the confidence of those frontline states, and something that Russia could still very easily reverse on its part if it wanted to.
Do you think Putin is slowly testing Trump, making moves to just see how he reacts?
It's a very difficult question, and I think that to some extent the Kremlin has got more than it bargained for. I think their aim was to discredit the American political system. I think they thought that Hillary would win, but would win as a very damaged candidate, and that there would be a continuing debilitating Trump insurgency all through her presidency. I don't think they thought that Mr. Trump would actually win. And now he has, although they have some advantages from that. It certainly makes them look like geopolitical masterminds who can throw an election on the other side of the world in a much bigger and richer country. It also creates some problems because of Mr. Trump's unpredictability. And America is a far bigger and stronger country than Russia, and having your biggest and strongest adversary run by someone who is fundamentally unpredictable and really in a quite a dangerous way, I think is not ideal from the Kremlin's point of view.
But the Wall Street Journal just came out with a poll that showed that Putin in the United States is actually at record favorability ratings right now.
Well, that's what I mean by Mr. Trump's loose talk and loose tweets, that he has unleashed and legitimized a whole range of things, which I think are deplorable, to use Hillary Clinton's favorite word. But I think that he has created a bit of a cult of a strongman, that what you need in politics is a leader who's really good at making deals and making things happen, and sort of a slightly, to me, sort of sinister cult of the strongman. And I think that this has echoed with Mr. Putin's rise to popularity. And there are, I fear, Americans who say, well, we've got a strong leader and the Russians have got a strong leader, and that's great. We want a world full of strong leaders. I would say that history suggests that a world full of strong leaders leads to catastrophic, horrible conflicts and problems. I much prefer a rules-based international order run by very boring people like Angela Merkel.
Yeah, going off that, when Trump gave the interview to Bill O'Reilly, Bill O'Reilly said Putin's a killer, but Trump said we have a lot of killers. And you wrote that Trump is using this whataboutism. How is that affecting the West negatively?
Well, Trump is destroying the West's moral high ground. He thinks there's no real difference between the West and the East, that it's like life is all about power and money. And this is something that we've spent all the Cold War and all the post-Cold War years really trying to prove and argue otherwise, that we think that democracy is real, the rule of law is real, that dignity and decency and justice and all these abstract things really matter, and that our system is fundamentally better. Our people live in freedom and prosperity and have a better life than people do under Putin's kleptocratic crony capitalist authoritarian system. And Trump has just taken an axe to that, and by saying it's all the same, he legitimizes the Russian attack on the West, which says that talk of human rights and so on is just all baloney, phony, whatever. And so I think it's extremely bad, and this damage has been done. It will be, and it's going to be with us for some time.
So does this fit into moral relativism?
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is, it's not even moral, it's just relativism.
In the Baltic states, what is the feeling there? I know you live in Estonia some of the time, but how is the reaction there to what's going on in Ukraine? Do they expect any type of hybrid war, any type of conflict to maybe come about there?
I think that the Baltic states are vigilant, but they're not alarmed, and they've done an awful lot to protect their interests, and they have, in the case of Estonia, they never dropped conscription. Lithuania's brought it back. They are, I think, more resilient and better prepared for anything than many of their neighbours. I think the Swedes are in a state of some panic at the moment. The Estonians, I think, are in a sober, realistic frame of mind. And they do know that it would still be a very big deal for Russia to attack the Baltics. It's not just American soldiers defending. You've got British, French, Canadian. This whole enhanced forward presence of NATO is turning a tripwire into a speed bump and a roadblock. And it's a bit like West Berlin during the Cold War. We didn't expect to defend West Berlin militarily. We didn't build a Maginot Line around West Berlin. We had enough military there to make it clear to the Soviets this won't be a pushover. You attack West Berlin, you kill an awful lot of our soldiers, and we'll be mad at you, and we'll respond as we choose. And I think that's basically the model for the Baltics, and they know that. I think they are a bit worried about a post-American, post-NATO security order, and there's a lot of interest now in building regional security structures with intense cooperation with Sweden and Finland, for example, perhaps not as a substitute for the NATO guarantee, but as a complement to it.
Will the West ever be able to make peace with Putin long term?
I think that we didn't start this. Russia started it, and before Putin, that Russia has this idea that it's still basically an empire, that it has special rights over its neighbours, and that the rules-based multilateral order, which has grown up since 1991 and partly before, is fundamentally unfair because it treats Russia as just another country. And so long as Russia feels that, we're going to have a problem with Russia, whether it's Putin in charge or Medvedev or somebody else. So I think that we have to be very patient and very firm and concentrate on what we can do, which is securing the interests of our allies. Our record of doing deals with Putin and with other Russian leaders is actually quite bad. And when we intervene in Russian politics, we often get a result that we don't like. So I think we should be rather humble about this and just concentrate on the stuff we can do and leave it for the Russian people eventually to sort out how they want their country to be run and how it should interact with the rest of the world. But this may be a question of decades, not years.
And my final question, how do you see the situation in eastern Ukraine, the seizure of Crimea? How do you see that playing out in the near future?
Well, I haven't been there recently. I feel that my advice to Ukrainians would be to try to freeze the conflict and get on with making a success of the rest of Ukraine, and regard this as a project for many decades, that we solved the division of Germany by making West Germany really, really prosperous, to the point that East Germans didn't want to live under communism anymore. And I think that's the model I would put forward as a solution for Ukraine. I don't think Russia's going to collapse anytime soon. I don't think it's going to abandon its proxies or its rule over Crimea. And so I think my advice would be get dug in for a very long-term sort of civilizational approach to this, rather than hoping for a quick military or diplomatic victory.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Lucas, for joining us today on UATV. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I'm Alex Gupta with UATV.